Okay, hi everyone. Good evening. I know it's just about 8 o'clock. We're going to just wait one more minute for a few more friends to sign on. Now, if you're watching on Facebook, you can post questions below and I'm happy to ask the questions.
Okay, hi everyone. Good evening.
And I didn't mute myself on my phone, so I'm hearing myself twice. Sorry about that. Yes, you can post questions on the Facebook group, the Facebook Live, and I will ask them in the Zoom call. Thank you all for watching. Okay, we'll wait about one more minute and then we'll start. Okay, I think most of everybody is here or already signed on and watching. So shalom, everyone. Thank you for joining us here tonight to discuss the topic of developmental milestones. For those who don't already know me, my name is Ali Weiner Avraham. I am the Jewish Education and Early Childhood Education Coordinator at the JCC of the Lehigh Valley in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I myself am a parent of 2 young children and wear plenty of hats in our community as a teacher, educator, and support for our teachers and parents within our community. I am really excited for tonight's topic being given by Dr. Andrea Goldsmith on developmental milestones. There is so much to learn here. Me personally, having 2 young children, I'm always excited to hear new things about what's to come next, or if I'm not seeing what I should be seeing. And I'm hoping that Dr. Goldsmith can give me a new perspective on to what to expect next. Dr. Goldsmith, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Ali. My name's Andrea Goldsmith, and I am a general pediatrician here in the Lehigh Valley, and also a mom of 1 current and 2 former JCC early childhood students. I really like working with families from birth really up through college years, and I feel like development is such an important thing to talk about because really the early years that we're going to touch on tonight are the years that really sort of impact childhood moving forward, and when you can have the greatest opportunity for intervention and to really just help a child reach their full potential. So should I get started? Okay, so I just have a PowerPoint. It's a little dry in parts because it's a huge age range to cover, so bear with me. And if you have questions, just I guess let Ali know or let me know. And here we go. Let's do this. Share. Okay. So again, I'm Andrea Goldsmith and I'll be talking about developmental milestones. Just a quick overview. I'd like to answer the questions, what are typical developmental milestones for children from birth through age 5? And what can I do if my child does not seem to be meeting these milestones? So to start, what is a developmental milestone? I'm just going to move this little block of chat over here. There we go. Okay. Children reach milestones in how they play, how they learn, how they speak, how they behave, and how they move. Typically, a milestone means that a child can perform a task without any assistance or independently. I touched on these areas already, but really to break it down formally, it's social emotional development, language and communication, cognitive, and then motor development, which is further broken down into gross motor and fine motor. Some milestones don't fit into one category. So for example, communication and cognitive have a ton of overlap. Some of the cognitive and fine motor skills have a lot of overlap as well. And there's a range. So if I talk about one milestone being reached at, say, 18 months, for example, it doesn't mean that another child can't reach that milestone at 2, but there are ranges for sort of when things are expected and when not meeting it sort of becomes what we'll call a red flag, which I'll get to in a minute. So social emotional, basically it just means the loving relationships that give children a sense of comfort, safety, confidence, and encouragement, teaches children how to form friendships, how to communicate their emotions, and how to deal with challenges. And when they reach these strong social emotional milestones, they're able to develop trust, empathy, compassion, and a general sense of right from wrong. In communication, this is basically communication, just what it sounds like, the ability to connect with others verbally and also non-verbally, which is very important, especially at the very young ages. And most children use communication as a way to get what they need or to interact with a trusted adult, especially at this age, birth through 5. Cognitive and problem solving refers to the development of the ability to think, understand, and to reason. And these things, such as memory, information processing, and problem solving, really do emerge and evolve throughout childhood. Movement and physical is broken down again into 2 areas. So the gross motor are the things that you might think of first, things that involve larger muscles, such as running, walking, balance, things that really use the arms and legs. And then the fine motor skills are the smaller things, usually things where you'd use fingers, toes, eyes, hand-eye coordination, things like that. Things like drawing, writing, using scissors, waving, catching, that sort of thing. So again, we'll talk about kind of what does typical development look like within each age group, when should certain milestones be met, and what delays should be watched for. I'll go through each of those domains in the 2-month, 4-month, 6-month, 9-month, 12-month, 18-month, 2-year, 3-year, and 4-year, and 5-year. So if none of these ages applies to you, just tune out for a little while and I will get to the ages that do. Red flags, those are sort of behaviors or delays that signal a problem with development and suggest that an evaluation should be performed. So these are the things where if you're wondering, is something sort of really abnormal or should I sit tight? If these are the things that you're noticing at a specific age, and I'll break it down by age level as well, that's when I'd recommend that you sort of don't wait. So at 2 months, what are 2-month-olds doing socially? They're just really starting to smile. They're developing that social smile, usually from about 5 to 8 weeks, that will emerge. They might try to look at their parents, try to follow things. And then communication-wise, they start to coo. They start to make really kind of gurgling sounds, make lots of vowel sounds, oohs, ahs, and they'll also start to turn their head and listen for sounds. Cognitively, a 2-month-old tends to pay attention to faces. Their vision's not great yet, but they can see a lot of things up close. So when you're with a 2-month-old, you want to kind of be really within about 12 to 24 inches so that they can recognize a face. And then they'll start to track things or follow with their eyes. Motor-wise, they can usually hold their head up and start to push up when they're on their belly. So usually that'll start out with maybe just picking their head up and then their head and neck, and then later on sort of more up to their forearms. And then they should be able to make pretty smooth movements with their arms and legs, so not really jerky, but a little bit more fluid. And then at 2 months, the red flags are the delays that you want to watch for, not responding to loud sounds, not watching things at all, not smiling. And again, all these things happen within a continuum. So if your baby's right at 2 months and maybe they're not smiling a ton yet, give it a couple weeks. These aren't emergencies, but typically we like babies to start smiling around 2 months and not holding their head up at all when they're on their tummy. At 4 months, the social emotional tends to involve spontaneous smiling. So they're much more ready to smile. 4 to 6 month olds are the smiliest babies ever. They'll start to laugh. Sometimes, you know, when something's funny, not just out of nowhere, but it doesn't require like tickling, for example. It's kind of in response to something that delights them. And they like to play with people. And when the playing stops, they might cry. So they're upset about it. Communication-wise, they're doing a lot of cooing, and then they can copy sounds and they might use some expressions, sort of like they're having a little conversation with their vowel sounds. And then they'll have different cries. So you can tell a 4-month-old if they're hungry, they may have one cry. If something hurts, they'll have another. If they're tired, they may have another cry. So they're really communicating a lot. Cognitively, they'll use their hands and eyes together. So a big thing is that a 4-month-old can put their hands together in the midline, which is also motor, but they'll reach for a toy. They may be able to pull it towards them. They may not yet, but they're reaching for it. They're trying to intentionally grab something and attain it. And then they'll put their hands together in the midline and also put things in their mouth. And then they'll recognize familiar people and things at a distance. So by 4 months, their vision's actually really good. Motor-wise, something called head lag goes away, and that's important. So when you lay a baby on their back, sometimes you may have seen a pediatrician do this, but they'll sort of hold the baby by their hands or their forearms and try and pull them up. And if their head kind of tips back still, then maybe that's a little bit of head lag and you want to watch for that to go away. Typically a 4-month-old should be able to hold their head pretty steadily, and that's another sign that maybe they're ready to start eating baby food soon, things like that. They'll typically bear weight on their feet when they're on a hard surface, not by themselves, but if you're holding under their armpits, for example, they can kind of push down and might step a little bit. They may be able to roll from belly to back, and they, again, can hold a toy and reach for things. And when they're laying on their stomach, that's when they really get up onto their elbows. So at 4 months, delays to watch for, if they're not watching things as they move, if they're not smiling at all, and that's when I would really say that a smile should be there. They can't hold their head steady, so they still kind of flap around, or they lack some neck control. If they're not cooing or making any vowel sounds, not putting things in their mouths, the mouthing thing starts usually around 3 months. So by 4 months, really, they should be able to do it. Not putting any weight on their legs, and trouble moving one or both eyes. So you want to watch for visual tracking and make sure that they have a full range of eye movement at that age. Partly for that, you want to make sure that they're developing the visual cortex, the visual pathways in their brain. By 4 months, a lot of the eye crossing that a lot of babies do will go away. So if they're not able to move their eyes throughout, then you know that maybe you need to look into it a little bit further. At 6 months, social and emotional wise, babies tend to know familiar faces versus strangers, and they may tend to be reluctant about strangers. They like to play with others, especially their parents and other close caregivers, and they like to look at themselves in the mirror. Now, they don't know it's them, they just like the smiling face in the mirror. Communication-wise, they respond to sounds by making sounds, so it can be very reciprocal. And then they begin to say consonants or make babble sounds. And a babble sound will be like a ba ba da da, and it doesn't mean anything. It's not specific. They're not actually saying mama, sorry, but they're making the consonant sounds. And then also cognitively, they'll start to bring more things to their mouths to explore them. They'll show curiosity about things. They'll try and get things that are out of reach. And then they'll roll over in both directions. That's a big motor skill. Not every baby will roll in both directions at 6 months, but they should at least show that they want to, that they may try, they may get stuck on an arm. Babies are now sleeping on their backs. And so whereas before babies slipped from belly to back first, a lot now, and this has been over the past 20 plus years, they're flipping from back to belly because they're spending more time on their backs. So if the both ways doesn't come quite as quickly as it may have in the distant past, that's okay. You just want to see that they're interested in moving in that direction. And then some babies at this age will rock back and forth on their hands and knees trying to crawl. They may start to go backwards before they go forwards, but again, the intent to move is there. And then passing something from hand to hand or transferring is one of those sort of early fine motor skills that they may have. So delays to watch for. At 6 months, a baby really should be trying to get things that are in reach. If they're not showing affection for caregivers, that's a red flag. If they're not responding to any sounds, having difficulty getting things to their mouths, not making vowel sounds. The consonants may come a little bit later, but the vowels should be there by 6 months. Not rolling over at all or not trying to. No affection for caregivers, that's a duplicate, sorry. Not laughing or squealing or making sort of joyful sounds. Or this is important, if their muscles seem tight, if it seems like they can't sort of move purposefully, not because they don't want to, but because they just can't. And the flip side to that is if they just seem floppy, like they don't have any sort of tone holding their muscles in control, if they sort of seem more like a puppet where the strings are just kind of loosey-goosey. At 9 months, the social stuff becomes separation anxiety and stranger anxiety. And what that is it's tied to their motor skills. So at this age, a lot of babies are trying to sort of explore. They're starting to crawl. They may be trying to walk or cruise. And what they want to do when they're doing those things and asserting their autonomy is they want to look back and say, wait a second, where's my touchstone? Where is my caregiver, my parent? So they're going to be very, very nervous about strangers because that's not who they need when they're looking for that reassurance. So they don't want to be separated from their parents and they don't want to be with strangers because they need all the support they can get at that period of really, really huge development. Language-wise, they understand no, so you can tell a baby no, and they respond to their own name. They might not say anything, but they'll usually turn their head. And they'll make a lot of different sounds, different babbling sounds. It's not specific until probably closer to 14 months usually, but they will say things like mama, baba. A lot of times they'll say dada at that age. And then cognitively, if they see something fall, they'll watch it fall. So they understand that it still exists even when it's out of their sight, and they understand that it goes somewhere. They'll look for things when you see them hide. All of this is object permanence. They know that even when something is not immediately visible, it's still a thing in the world. They might play peekaboo, they might wave or clap their hands, and they might start to pick things up with a pincer grasp. So rather than raking that a lot of babies will do to get things from 4 months on, they'll start to pinch things. And that's important because this is the age that a lot of babies will start eating table food. Motor skills, they can usually get into a seated position from laying or crawling. They can sit well without support. They can often pull to a stand, but not always. Sometimes they'll pull to their knees before pulling to a stand. And they can often, but not always, crawl. Again, they might be crawling backward, they might be crawling forward, but just some sort of propulsion. Some kids will skip crawling entirely and go to pulling to stand, and some will actually kind of sit on their tush and just kind of scoot along. So delays to watch for at 9 months, not bearing any weight on the legs with support. So not unassisted, but just some weight bearing is expected. Not sitting, not babbling, not making any consonant sounds, not responding to their name, not recognizing familiar people. And they don't have to have the stranger or separation anxiety. Not every baby does, but they should recognize familiar from unfamiliar. Not looking where you point and not transferring things back and forth. And then at 1 year, a ton happens. So the separation and the stranger anxiety really continue. They may have favorite things and favorite people. They start to show a lot of preference. A 1-year-old can hand you a book when they want to hear a story. They're starting to make those connections, which is really neat. And they might play the games such as peekaboo, things like patty cake. Language-wise, they'll respond to simple spoken requests. So if you say, let's go outside, they might head over to the door. Or if you say, do you want another Cheerio? They might reach for the Cheerio. And different babies will be sort of at different levels as far as that goes. They might use simple gestures like shaking their head no. A lot of babies will shake no way before they'll shake yes, which is really frustrating sometimes for parents. And they'll make sounds with change in tone and inflection. So they'll really sort of have their own little conversation. They'll say mama and dada. They might say things like uh-oh, little words like hi, bye. Typically at 1, we like for kids to have 1 word in addition to mama and dada. Cognitively, they'll do all kinds of things just to see how something works. They might shake something, bang something, throw something. They will throw a lot of things repeatedly. And if you pick it up and you give it back, they will throw it again until you stop picking it up and giving it back. They'll find hidden things very easily. So if you put a toy under a blanket, they'll remove the blanket and voila, there's the toy. And they're very excited about that. And they'll start to use kind of household things like a hairbrush or a cup. And they'll probably hold the hairbrush upside down and with the flat part against their head and hit themselves in the head, but they're trying. And then they'll follow simple directions. Motor-wise, there's a lot going on at 1. So they'll get to the seated position without help, same as at 9 months. Again, there's a continuum. They'll pull up to stand. They may cruise, which is sort of walking, holding on to things. They might take steps without holding on. And some 1-year-olds are walking proficiently at that point. And then fine motor-wise, they'll bang things together. They'll put things in a container and take out of a container, sometimes turn things over and dump them. And sometimes they'll stick their finger and poke at things. Some doctors still do something called a Denver developmental test, and they'll give a baby like a clear bottle with a Cheerio inside. And why they're doing that is to kind of test if they'll stick their finger in and try and poke the Cheerio. And then they'll usually feed themselves with their hands. They'll eat a lot of table food and they just shovel it in. They're not interested in having somebody else spoon feed them at that point. So 1 year delays to watch for. If they can't stand with support, if they don't uncover that hidden toy, if they don't seem to have that object permanence, if they're not saying anything, nothing like mama, nothing like dada, not even anything resembling a word, not learning gestures like waving or shaking their head, not pointing. Pointing is a big one. We really like the sort of index finger point. And some kids, it does come a little bit later, but pointing, if it's there, it's usually pretty reassuring. And then this is the same from here on out, losing skills that they once had. You want babies and kids from 1 and up to really maintain those skills. Sometimes younger kids and even kids this age will sort of practice something so much or get so much reaction from it that they fatigue and they don't want to do it again. But some of these skills like crawling, walking, self-feeding, they really just should stay put. At 18 months, you have a much older baby. They may have temper tantrums, yay. They may play simple pretend games. They might feed a baby doll or try to, dress a baby doll or try to feed you. They'll point to show what they're interested in and they'll explore things alone, but they still like to have somebody close by. They don't love to play by themselves much. And then language-wise, they should have a handful of words. By 15 months, we like about 3 to 5 words, and by 18 months, about 10 to 15 single words. And I always tell people, a word, it can be a sound that represents an idea. So if it doesn't sound like complete English to you, it doesn't mean it's not a word. But if you know that when your child says meh, that it means monkey, and that's what they always say for monkey, then I count it because they think they're saying it and you understand, so you can relate that sound to that idea. They should usually say no and shake their head no, and they'll point. Again, pointing is a big thing that kind of continues. Cognitively, they'll know what things are. They'll know what a phone is. Every kid knows what a phone is. A brush, a spoon. They can point to some body parts. They may not be able to name them, but they can usually point to things like typically head, feet, belly button, nose. Those are the first ones usually. And they can usually follow one-step commands without gestures. So whereas before you might have said, we're going to go outside and hand them their jacket, you can really kind of tell them what you want and expect them to verbally understand what that means. They can walk alone. By 18 months, if a child is not walking, we do start to worry. They can drink from a cup. An open cup is ideal. I know most parents don't want to give their kids open cups because it's a mess, and that's okay. As with every other milestone, they have to be exposed to it in order to master it. So if they haven't tried an open cup and you're worried, don't worry if you haven't given them one yet. Eating with a spoon and sometimes a fork, and scribbling. So give them crayons, washable things, and let them try to scribble. So delays to watch for at 18 months. If they're not pointing to show things to others, if they can't walk, if they don't know what things are for, not at least 5 new words. So they don't have to have the 10 to 15, but a decent few words is good. Or not gaining new words. So some kids might only have 5 words, but they're gaining a new word every day. Then we really don't worry about that. Not imitating others at all, not minding or noticing when a caregiver leaves. And that's not like if you say, bye, I'm going out, you're with so-and-so, it's just sort of not even registering that it's a change in caregiver. And then losing skills that they once had. So at 2 years, the social emotional involves sort of copying others, especially adults and older children. They love older children. Getting excited when they're with other kids. They really start to get social and interactive, and they know the difference between kids and adults. Showing more independence, sometimes testing limits and showing some defiance. It's not defiance in the scary sense. It's just sort of like, I am a big kid now and I can do this, and so I'm going to do it even if you say no, and that's okay. Just set really clear, consistent limits and redirect, just redirect and distract. And then plays mostly beside other children. So they won't play a back and forth game necessarily, but they're doing parallel play. They want to be near each other, but not maybe cooperating yet. Communication-wise, they'll point to pictures and books when they're named, pointing to all kinds of different things. Even if they can't say as many words, they should really know and understand a lot. They'll say sentences with 2 to 4 words, sometimes more, and usually 50 or more words. And then strangers can understand about half of what they say. So this is where those sort of sounds that represent ideas, at least half of what comes out of their mouth should be something that they can get a point across to somebody who does not know them. And then following simple instructions. And that can be 2-step commands at this point. So cognitively, they might start sorting shapes and colors. They might not know the names of them, that sometimes they can kind of associate different shapes and colors with each other. Some 2-year-olds will know all their colors and shapes, but that's not the benchmark to compare. Completes like sentences and rhymes in books. So if it's something you read a lot, they may be able to fill in some words. Simple make-believe games, and 2-step instructions, like I mentioned before. Motor-wise, they can stand on their tiptoes, they can kick a ball, they can throw a ball, they can start to jump. They might sort of do a little skip thing before they can get both feet off the floor, but most 2-year-olds can run. They can walk up and down stairs. They might need to hold on, that's okay. And they can build a tower with a few blocks and usually copy straight lines. So not just scribbling anymore, but more intentional movements. And then delays at 2. So if they're not using 2-word phrases at all, for example, drink milk, or usually they'll get their pronouns mixed up. So maybe me want, or maybe go out, or a popular one, dada home, something like that. Or no mommy. Not showing any interest in other children, not following any simple instructions, not walking steadily, and losing skills that they once had. So at 3, social emotional, they show a ton of affection for their friends. They want to play with their friends, legitimately play with them at this point. They can take turns. They might not always do it, but they can. They understand the idea of mine, his, hers. Sometime in the 2s, they usually mine, mine, mine. And then at 3, they really kind of get possession. They'll show a very wide range of emotion, and sometimes they can name their feelings. A lot of times they can't, and so they'll come across as huge feelings and you might not know why. But there will be feelings. They can get upset if the routine changes, and they can dress and undress themselves. My 3-year-old dresses herself daily in very interesting things. Communication-wise, they understand words like in, on, under, a lot of their prepositions. They can usually say their first name. They can tell you how old they are. They're always free. And their gender. Usually they know if they're a boy or a girl. They can name their friends, they can name a lot of objects, and they can say their pronouns pretty accurately. And strangers can understand about 75% at this point. Cognitively, they'll make believe a ton. Dolls, animal, people, everything is make believe. Great imaginations. They might do some puzzles, they can count things, and they can turn their pages in a book one at a time. And a lot of times they'll sit there and sort of read, and they're not reading necessarily, but they're sort of turning pages and maybe telling a story and kind of acting like they're reading. Motor wise, they can usually climb really well, run really well, and they can start to pedal a tricycle. A lot of times we don't do tricycles anymore. They can kind of push a balance bike, or sort of propel themselves in some other way, maybe on a scooter or whatever the case. They can walk up and down the stairs, alternating one foot on each step like adults walk up, screwing and unscrewing jar lids, and turning door handles so they can leave their rooms now. Copying a circle with a pencil or a crayon, and building a bigger tower close to 6 blocks. So at 3, delays that we watch for: if they fall down a lot, if they can't do stairs, if they drool, if they don't seem to be able to handle their saliva in their mouth, and if their speech is a little bit garbled. If they can't do simple toys like simple puzzles, if they can't turn handles, not speaking in any phrases or sentences, not using their imagination, not playing pretend, not playing with other children or playing with toys, no eye contact, and again, losing skills they once had. At 4, they tend to play mom and dad. They tend to play sort of different role play things. They become very creative. They'd rather play with other children than by themselves. They tend to cooperate for the most part, and they like to talk about what they like. They talk about their likes, their interests. They become, they're interesting before 4, but at 4, they really sort of have their personalities, and they're really kind of fun to hang out with and do things that you might like to do too. Communication-wise, they can sing songs, they can say poems, they can tell stories, sometimes say their first and last name, and strangers should understand most of what they say, almost 100%. Some letter sounds will come much later. So the R's, for example, can come up until 7 or 8. The THs often sounds like Fs. A lot of those sounds, it's okay if they come later, but the gist of what they're saying should be about 100% understood. Cognitively, they can understand counting. They can understand sort of time relative to itself. So not like it's 5 o'clock, but tomorrow, today, yesterday, things like that. They can sort of finish a story. So what do you think is going to happen next? Like, what do you think is going to happen, after Ariel gets her legs? I don't know. And they understand same versus different. Motor wise, they can hop, they can catch a ball, they can use scissors. That takes some practice. So give your kids scissors if they're 4. They can draw a person with several body parts, and they can start to copy some letters. So at 4, delays, red flags, what to watch for. If they can't jump, if they have trouble scribbling, that's when we start to work on the pencil grasp a little more. So some kids will kind of fist the pencil, and that's okay for a while. But as they sort of get to 4 into pre-K, you want to really work on that mature grasp so that they're ready for kindergarten. Showing no interest in make-believe, that's a red flag. Ignoring other children, not responding to other people. They're having issues with some of the biggies, like the dressing, the sleeping, using the toilet. These should be things that a 4-year-old is kind of on the ball with. Not telling stories, not following commands, not using pronouns. So some kids will talk in the third person for a while, and that's okay to a point, but at 4, they should be pretty consistently using I, me, you, if they're unclear or if they lose skills that they once had. And our last age group, social emotional. So they want to please their friends. They want to be like their friends. Really, their friends start to become a lot of what they're interested in. They're more likely to agree with rules than maybe they were before. They know their limits. They know what they can do. They understand, maybe not why limits are there, but that they exist and that they need to sort of adhere to those. They can show concern and sympathy. They are aware of gender. And then they become more independent, sometimes demanding, sometimes cooperative, but they're, you can reason with them a little bit, not always. Communication, they speak very clearly. They can tell a simple story. They can go back and forth, have a conversation. They should start to learn their address at this point, and their parents' phone number. Cognitively, they can count 10 or more things. They can draw a person, full person. They can print some letters and numbers, and they know about things they don't know, money as far as dimes and nickels maybe, but they know that you need money to pay for something. They know that food, you can get it from a refrigerator or a pantry. They have a general sense of everyday workings. And then motor-wise, they can stand on 1 foot for 10 seconds. They can do a somersault. They can use the bathroom. The sky's the limit. They can really do what a lot of adults can. I laughed at the one about the table knife when I was researching this because my 8-year-old can't use a knife. I would never let him. Most 8-year-olds probably can, but I feel like giving a kid a knife is like a no-no. At 5, you can try. You can print some letters and numbers, and you can copy a triangle at this point. So delays to watch for. Pretty restricted emotion if they're not showing a range, if it's extreme behavior, so extremes of emotion that kind of fluctuate from here to there. Super distracted if they can't focus for more than a couple minutes on something. They can't say their name, if they're not drawing, if they can't sort of do those activities of daily living, the washing hands, the drying hands, the getting dressed, and then losing skills that they once had. So how can I help my child? This is the big question now that we've run through that huge list. Talk to them, just talk all the time. If you don't have anything to say, my mom who's watching always says, sing a song. It's easier. It already has words built in. Recite a nursery rhyme. The more language they hear, the more they'll understand, the more they'll acquire. Provide age-appropriate manipulatives. So nothing fancy. You can give them a sock. You can give them a paper towel roll. You can give them a shoebox, but things like blocks, crayons, whatever, just something to use, something to explore. Play with your kids, go outside, play inside, let them lead the way, and then also do back and forth games, especially when they're older, so that they understand sort of how to do that. And then limit screen time. This is sort of my personal crusade against screen time. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends none under the age of 2, except for Skype and FaceTime with family and loved ones. That's okay, actually. And less than 1 to 2 hours a day after that. Educational programming, if you're going to do it for those 1 to 2 hours a day, pick educational programming. But I think educational and screen time are sometimes at odds with each other because kids who are super young don't understand that what's on the screen is not happening in real life and they can't interact with it in a back and forth way. When they're a little bit older, of course, it's fine. But when they're super young, try to limit the best you can. And then what do you do if you recognize delays? This is sort of, I can leave this up. So talk to your child's doctor. I think that's the first thing to do. Absolutely. Sort of get their input where they should be, maybe what their strengths are, maybe where they need help. But don't wait. If you're worried, talk. Most doctors will respect your parents' intuition and listen and help you sort of steer in the right direction. And then through the state of Pennsylvania and through most states, there is a program. Early intervention is the agency that covers from birth through age 3. And then after age 3, something related and very similar called the intermediate unit picks up, and they handle from 3 through 6. After that, really, there are services available. A lot of things happen through school. It's a state program. It's free of charge if you live in Pennsylvania. I mentioned that because that's where we are right now. And it's run county by county. So there's a number for each county, and all you do is you call and you say, I have a concern about my child's development. I'd like an evaluation. And they come out and they evaluate. A lot of it's done virtually these days, but they come out and they evaluate. And when it's not virtual, it's actually done in the home or sometimes through early childhood or daycare centers. And then there's something called the Connect Helpline, which if you don't know which county to call for, if you don't know what to do, if you have no idea who to call, this is a number that can reach early intervention and intermediate unit resources, and they can sort of point you in the right direction within that umbrella of services. There are private developmental services available as well. Some people might be kind of on the bubble and might not qualify for early intervention or intermediate unit services, even though they might really benefit from them a ton. And so sometimes going private or sometimes accessing through your health network. So locally, we've got Lehigh Valley and we have St. Luke's. Good Shepherd is great for rehabilitation services. There are lots of places that you can go, and typically insurance will cover, depending on your insurance, all or some or several visits with one of these places. I will also mention these days, some of these private resources can be really good because a lot of them are doing in-person therapies, which for a little kid who's having a hard time, it can be really hard to interact on Zoom. But in person, a lot of kids can benefit from that. So sometimes, especially now, we've been taking a sort of two-pronged approach. We have a concern and helping kids to access both avenues. Other branches that are even more specialized are developmental pediatrics, and they can sometimes assess other things, areas where there might be delays that need more workup, specifically kids who might have autism, kids who might have ADHD who are too young to be evaluated by the pediatrician. And sometimes a developmental pediatrician can really kind of finesse out that type of thing and provide a ton more resources. Physiatry is something that a lot of people don't know about, and that's for more of the motor skills and some of the gross motor things. So that floppy baby that I mentioned, the baby who's a little bit too tight maybe, you can kind of figure out, is there a physical reason, and are there things I need to be doing medically to help my child reach those motor milestones? And then kidshealth.org is just an amazing resource for all things kids related. If you've forgotten everything I said tonight, you can go there and they will touch on a lot of appropriate developmental things for each age, and pretty much almost any question you have about anything kid related, that website will answer. So questions, and I can go back and I can always give this slide or all of it to Allie, but I'll stop sharing, I guess, and let Allie take over. Okay.
Thank you so much. That was so informative. I really learned so much tonight. I have a whole list of things that I'm looking forward to seeing with my own kiddos and in our classrooms. I have a question. What do you do if you don't see, so you mentioned before what you do. You mentioned you go to the doctor and you ask the doctor, what do I do if I'm not seeing these milestones being met? What's usually the next step after that? If your area doesn't have early intervention, or if you don't qualify for early intervention, what do you do if you still have those concerns?
Mm-hmm. I mean, every area has it typically because it's a state-sponsored program. So it shouldn't be an issue. Accessing it sometimes can be challenging if you don't qualify, for example. But that would be a situation where I would try to access some of those local private resources because typically you'll qualify. Now, something else that early intervention might do is if you don't qualify, they might give you sort of like a home plan or some exercises you can do or some speech things you can do, and then maybe they check back in a couple months to see if you're making progress. So sometimes that can be helpful. And if they do that, that might be something, for example, that you could share with your child's school or something like that, so that everybody can be consistent and really trying to work to optimize their progress. But the private resources can be helpful. And if they haven't qualified and it's been a little while and they're still not making progress, then you call again. If you have to be really assertive, then do so.
Sounds great, thank you. Margot has a question. Margot Lightman asks, do you feel there is some truth to the stereotype that girls meet most of their milestones before boys? With a big smiley face there.
Not the gross motor ones, no. That's tough because I've seen it both ways. Just from my experience, yeah, I think girls talk earlier. I think girls are easier to toilet train. So some of those things, yes. I think some of it, maybe personality, you know, how they kind of assimilate the world. There will be plenty of little boys who can sit and, you know, draw all day long. But I guess there probably is some truth to the stereotype that girls pick up more milestones, maybe because the connections in their brain are just happening differently, or maybe because they're less go focused overall and they're able to sit down and learn it. I don't know. So I think there's some truth to it just anecdotally, but I don't know that it's been researched.
Thank you. Since you brought up potty training, what is the typical age that you should see your child showing interest in potty training? And at what point should you be worried if your child isn't interested or isn't hitting that milestone?
Not every child will show interest without sort of some prodding and some introduction. I think the age is getting later that children tend to be potty trained now. Our sort of canned answer as pediatricians is usually there should be some interest between about 18 months and 3 years of age. And that's a window where the interest really starts to show up. If it's not there at 3, it doesn't mean that it won't be there at 3.5 or that there's anything wrong with that. But typically some idea that grown-ups don't wear diapers shows up between about 18 months and 3, and then they kind of go from there. If there's no toileting at all by about 4, then I think you're probably at that 2 standard deviations where you may want to look into it.
Thank you. COVID aside, when do children need to start socializing? I mean, we keep our babies home, we protect them, but as they get older, it comes to a point where they need that social interaction to function in the world, besides just mom or dad or whoever's at home with them. So at what point is it really important for their development to start socializing?
I mean, kindergarten starts at 5 or 6. So I would say that's probably a hard cutoff, but I think when the parallel play turns more into cooperative play and probably closer to 3 tends to be a really good introductory age for that type of thing. I think at that point, a lot of kids are able to separate without a lot of distress. And some kids are ready much sooner, but I think 3 is probably a good age to really sort of suggest it, or what I'll often ask parents maybe at 2 or 2.5 is, are you thinking about preschool for the fall? Not saying that it has to happen, but just sort of gauge where they are. And if they're not, then maybe say, oh, well, have you in a pre-COVID world thought about library story times or thought about signing up for a music class or something, just some way to engage with other children, learn how to take their turn, learn how to listen to an adult that is not their parents. And I do think that in the absence of that, although public school usually starts at 5 or 6, that pre-K is pretty important, because kids these days are expected to come into kindergarten knowing their letters and knowing their numbers and knowing how to sit and attend for an entire day. So I think pre-K now is what kindergarten used to be.
Thank you. Our Zoom members, you are welcome to unmute and ask a question. So I'll give you guys a minute in case anybody would like to ask something.
a child to actually start walking?
Walking, I've seen anywhere from about
But actually walking.
walking, yes. I like them to be walking by 18 months. That's the later end. A range that I've seen is about 7 months and up. But by 18 months, if they're not walking, I would absolutely refer.
Thank you.
Hi, can I ask a question? Hi, Allie. One of my grandchildren, no, not Allie's, but one of my grandchildren, who is going to be 3 in June, she was walking late. She tends to do many things on the later end, but did it within the period. But if you say 18 months is when you get nervous, it's like literally she started walking at 18 months. And she was walking fine. And I noticed all of a sudden she's walking on her tiptoes. And it's a constant. It's not like once in a while, it's like all the time at this point.
That can be normal. If she was not always doing that and she can flex her feet flat, then it's fine. You want to encourage her to do so and see if it's happening all the time, whether it's on bare feet or whether it's in shoes. But some kids will toe walk up until 3 or so. And if their heel cord is so tight that they cannot flatten their foot, then that's when you want to seek an evaluation. But some kids just do it because it's a funny thing that they do. And if you can sort of move their foot from the pointed position down into flat, then it's okay to observe until about 3.
Thank you.
Sure.
It was a concern of mine. Allie, any other concerns that I've mentioned?
I
I
have a
happen to be
question.
Allie's mom. Hi, everybody.
I have a question. When you were discussing talking and clarity, if you have a child that speaks a lot but is very unclear, I know that you said there was like a 75% and then 100%. Where does that fall if you have a very young child that I guess falls before that 2-year age range that speaks a lot but is very unclear?
So if they're before 2, you like it, I mean, at 2, we like it to be half understood. Sometimes at that very young age, if they are able to form the sounds and they have all these ideas in their brain, then the ideas come out so fast that they don't have the time to pause and form the words. So it might sound like nothing, but in their head, it's completely organized, perfect English. But it comes out so fast that it's their tongue and their mouth, it can't move that way. It can't move fast enough. So if when they slow down or if when they're saying sort of more little bite-sized pieces, if it's clearer, then I really wouldn't worry. But if it's a lot of content and they're understanding well, then I'd probably kind of sit tight until they're 2 and kind of see what happens.
All right, thank you. Would a child that's exposed to multiple languages suffer, or not suffer, but have more of a delay, or would you give them more wiggle room to meet those verbal milestones?
I get that question at least 3 times a week. All the research says it doesn't matter, that it shouldn't result in speech delays. I'm not sure I believe the research. I think there are kids where it doesn't matter and maybe they learn English and Spanish and they're speaking both fluently by the time they're 2. But I don't know. I've definitely seen enough kids sort of take a little bit longer to get there. And some of it too, I think, is in how you ask the questions or in how you approach it. So if I say, does your child have 10 words? They say no, and then they say, oh, but they say this, 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 this. They name these 10 relatives, and they say maybe 3 words in one language and 4 words in another, and so maybe they're actually fine. So they don't have to be words that I know, they just have to be something. And I think naming relatives counts because they're associating a word with a very concrete idea.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Sure.
We have a question from Rachel. At 3.5 years, is it concerning if a child cannot sleep through the night?
Sleep is so tough. I think cannot or will not. So
Cannot. She
Cannot.
will wake up at, like, I put her to bed at 8:30.
uh-huh.
We'll be up at somewhere between 1 and 2 and just be awake, whether I rub her back or snuggle her. I'll put on the TV just so that I can go back to sleep, so that I can function through the rest of the day. And she'll still be awake at 6 o'clock. And then
And is
catch
it the
about a half an hour
same?
before starting the day.
Is it always the same waking time overnight,
I mean, it's not even every
give or
night.
take?
It's usually about 4 nights a week, 4 to
Okay.
5 nights a week.
And has it been that way forever?
Over a year now.
Okay.
Yeah.
If it's pretty consistent and it's around the same time, then it's probably something that she's learned to do. Probably just sort of a behavior that's ingrained. So the same way nap time might be a thing that kids are used to at this certain time that they fall asleep. It may be like, okay, at this time in the middle of the night, I wake up and this is what I do. Sleep training is a really hot button topic and maybe a little outside the scope of this. Every parent has to do what works for them. I think sleep training works. I think kids at this age really like to make a splash and they really like attention. And if they're getting attention for it, it's not that they're being bad at all, but if they're getting attention, they're going to do it because they're getting the results that they want. So I, as a parent, am sort of a close the door, walk away and come back in the morning type.
I can't do that
But
because
not everybody can do it.
Yeah.
So I hear you, I do.
Yeah.
But it sounds like if she responds to soothing and if you know that it's sort of maybe behavioral and not in a negative way, but just that maybe it is, then I don't know that I would flag that as a developmental issue. It's just more of like a schedule thing that you'll have to
You have
figure
to
out
get
what
out
as
of
a
the
parent you want to
schedule.
do.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Can I ask another question? Um, so the idea of, I hate the word issues, but sensory deprivation, or the idea of having, let's say, under 3, again, I'm going to mention this grandchild, who has a very distinct feeling towards certain food in terms of within their mouths, as well as the feeling of sand or dirt on them. I mean, it happens to be a girl, so are we going to say, wow, she's maybe a little bit on the prissy side? I don't know. But I noticed, as a matter of fact, today that there's a very heavy lisp. And I know that in the past, as I have 4 children, that, sometimes teeth or the development of how they thrust their tongue, and speech therapy, etc., might come in handy. How do you feel about that? Like, at what point should you be nervous?
I mean, I think if she's willing to explore different things and maybe chooses that some things are not for her and some things she prefers, and if she's able to eat a variety of different table foods, and just maybe knows that some things are not for her, then that's fine. I think if it's exclusion of many textures to the point of only wanting baby food, or only wanting to touch sand, or having such specific sort of needs and wants in a sensory way, that might be something to look into. It might be a speech thing or a feeding thing, or it might be more of an occupational therapy thing. As far as a lisp, I don't know that that's related to sort of what's going on with the textures. And that can be fine at this age because they're still working on forming some of their sounds. I think tongue tie is kind of a trendy and overdiagnosed thing these days. But sometimes if the excursion of the tongue is not far enough past the lip, and if it's limiting speech, then that might be something to look into as well.
And is there an age cutoff that you feel that it's like, okay, if they haven't done this milestone, or if they haven't gotten over the idea that sand at the beach isn't going to be the end of the world and won't go down to the beach because they don't want to get sand in their feet, that, you know, by the age of 4 or whatever, this now becomes an issue?
I mean, if it's like one specific thing, probably not. But if it's sort of extending into many different things, then yes. And I think, you know, 3 is a perfectly fine age to address it at that point. But something like that might benefit from, you know, don't go to the beach, maybe go to a sandbox, you know, maybe dip your toe in, maybe like pour a pile of sand on the kitchen table, not on your kitchen table, but start to maybe explore it a little bit to make it not so threatening, because the beach is huge and the waves are huge, but maybe try in sort of smaller doses to familiarize so that it's not so scary all at once.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And I love that idea about bringing those sensory aspects in a smaller way to your home and to your table, because that is that's something new for me to understand, for me to take in. I know sensory processing is a big thing right now, and it's a concern for lots of people these days. But I love that as our takeaway, our ending for the night, that when you notice these sensory sensitivities, to try them in smaller doses. I love that. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you, Dr. Andrea Goldsmith, for this amazing presentation and for answering all of our questions and our concerns. And I love that you guys all joined me here tonight. And I want to wish you all a good night. And I will see you again in 2 weeks for our next topic. Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
Thank
You, Allie, for inviting us.